All the Amicus pictures made money. Some did better than others. I was a distributor. The first picture I put together was The Good Old Days. And I knew nothing about distribution except the 14 customers that were unfortunate enough to play foreign films in America at that time. And Good Old Days was an enormous, rip-roaring success. Milton had gotten out of the Army, and Milton was a film buff, not a film man, and he came to me, and we became friendly. But I was always interested in pop culture, and so was Milton. And one day, I think our conversation was lubricated by a few drinks that I had and no drinks that he had. He was a teetotaler in every sense of the word. And I said, all the horror pictures I've ever seen were in black and white. Let's try to make a horror picture in color. So he wrote a screenplay at my suggestion called Curse of Frankenstein. I sold it to Elliot Hyman and Carreras. And Carreras and Hyman made a deal with Warner Brothers, and that too made a great deal of money. Not only weren't we credited, but Elliot Hyman stole our portion. It's lovely to speak ill of the dead. Stole our portion. I had 25% plus $5,000. We got the $5,000 for the screenplay. He gave up all of my rights to Ray Stark in order to purchase a relationship with him, and we never saw a cent of profits. I wanted to make a horror picture in England. I literally sent Milton to London because of the Eadie plan, which gave the producers a subsidy, and we organized Amicus. I think in horror pictures, they're all based on a simple premise, and it's very hard to sustain that premise for 90 minutes or 100 minutes. But if you have 4 or 5 good little stories with the basic concept running through it, I think it works.
At one time or another during our lives, we may, any one of us, encounter it. This deck can forewarn us. I call it my house of horrors.
I'd won one Oscar before I started directing, and I don't think I asked anybody if I could direct. I think somebody just asked me if I'd like to direct, and I thought it'd be a change, and I did it, and I quite enjoyed it. In retrospect, I don't think I should have started directing, but I don't really regret it because I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed doing it all. It's been a lot of fun, and I love making movies.
Any dutiful wife would do anything to bring her husband back to life, even after 200 years.
And like many films, there was more drama off-screen than on-screen. The picture was financed partially by the National Film Corporation, by Joseph Bogota, and by Paramount. And therein lies the tale. We started to shoot without the Paramount money, and I borrowed £500 from a friend of mine for our first week's payroll, and I came over with the Paramount check at the end of the first week's shooting.
I thought Max was a nice guy, but he was what I refer to as a sharp New Yorker, which he was. But we always got on very well, the three of us anyway. I imagine Milton had great ambitions film-wise and was hoping he'd hit the wonderful script eventually. The fact that he'd never be able to afford it didn't enter his mind, I think not. To my mind, he hadn't got much of a background in movies. He just loved making them, which is fine. I'm very fond of anybody who loves movies.
Supernatural art. The strange, the weird, the unknown, the terrifying.
Or Peter Cushing. It was absolutely a joy to work with Peter. It was just a delight, you know. It was a pity to finish work at night. Apart from being very good, he was a great advantage to people who had these ghastly horror scripts, such as I had, because Peter would pick them up and he'd look at these terrible lines and they came out of his mouth absolutely like magic. So he was worth twice his weight in gold to any horror movie.
Do not jest at the image of a god. A god? The powerful and malign god of voodoo.
If he had a change he wanted to make to the script, he'd come up very politely and say, "Freddie, I do feel that such and such a thing." And because Peter was such a charmer, I always say, "Peter, whatever you want, that's fine, go ahead." If every artist was like Peter, life would be very easy.
The cards predict the truth, the supernatural truth. Always. Anybody who believes that will believe anything.
Chris, I thought, was a very nice guy, slightly pompous, but he was a nice guy, and for the sort of parts that Chris played, he was absolutely perfect. You know, he could have been born into the part.
Paramount, Rosenberg, Amicus, Sabatsky, Dr. Terra is a nice little picture.
I think by the time we'd finished the first one, I think they just thought I was one of their crew, and they just carried on making the movie, as it were. There was no sort of big deliberation or anything about that. "Freddie, we've got this other script, will you do it?" "Fine, yes." We made the film in the part of the year when there just weren't any bees over here, so we had to ship them in. And of course they were untrained.
Working with the bees was no pleasure. They weren't even deadly, they just were stupid.
I think the idea was bad from the start, and I think the film showed it as well.
And Freddie is a very patient, sweet, and gentle soul. And if Freddie Francis hates something, believe me, there must be a reason for it.
I suppose the first thing is I should not have accepted the script. And the second thing is I should have had enough sense to know that it was an impossible script to work with.
I think Freddie at that time entered into a mortal struggle with Milton.
Oh, Milton, I'm sure, saved it in the cutting room. I'm sure every film that Milton has been on has been saved by him in the cutting room.
I think Milton spent at least 75% of his career with me and with Amicus in the cutting room.
Personally, if I had saved a film like Deadly Bees, I wouldn't like to boast about it.
House of Drip Blood, it's one of my favorite movies. I came up with the title, and Peter Duffel, who's a sweet and gentle and lovely man, and a damn good director, hated the title, and the only fight I ever had with him was over the title. He wanted to call it Death and the Maiden. To this day, I couldn't understand it. I think it's a Mozartian piece, if I'm not mistaken, or sonata, but whatever the hell it was, I wanted the title House of Drip Blood. And he hated it because he thought he made a very nice, lofty, in some cases funny, and in many cases scary movie, and I wanted to sell the hell out of it. And we did. House of Drip Blood was the most successful horror picture commercially that we made. House of Drip Blood was the most successful picture under the Amicus brand because I consider Tales from the Crypt separate and distinct because that made millions and millions of dollars. Bill Gaines of Mad Magazine became a good friend of mine for reasons best known to him. we became dear friends, and he gave me the right to make a movie. And we made Tales from the Crypt, and we did so much business that they had to buy me out because they couldn't afford. They couldn't afford. They didn't like to pay me, and Milton and we made well over $300,000 profit in addition to our salaries the first month the picture went into release.
He's been strangled.
Well, in between pictures at Hammer, Milton Subotsky turned up in my life, and he had a script called Asylum.
But we're a long way from Harley Street, out here. This is an asylum for the incurably insane.
Asylum, I would assume, is my homage to the Rank picture that was called Dead of Night.
It was a very clever idea because after Robert Bloch, who was famous for writing Psycho, he published several other books and quite a lot of short stories. And Milton had the idea of picking 3 or 4 or 5 of these stories and inventing a sort of envelope to put them in to make a film.
And Asylum's thesis is a simple one. A doctor who's taking a new job arrives in an asylum, and the question becomes, who are the crazies, the patients or the doctors? It's like going into a maze. In film noir terms, a film noir is about an innocent man who walks down a dark street and things happen to him. And this is what the Asylum is all about.
This particular bunch of stories was extremely effective. It was also very attractive because Milton had a marvelous facility for persuading big stars to come and appear in very, very short stories or tiny character parts. Herbert Long, for instance. Herbert had just 1 day's shooting, that's all. And there were a number of other people in it. Of course, Robert Powell was the mainstay of the whole enterprise, and Geoffrey Bayldon and Richard Todd and Sylvia Sims, and it's a wonderful cast. I look back on Asylum with great affection because it's a box of tricks, and I thoroughly enjoyed bringing it off.
What is it? This.
And at a great moment was when Richard Todd has dismembered his wife and wrapped her up in brown paper parcels and put them in a deep freeze. And then he goes to check it, and he leans over and suddenly... It's always been a wonderful shock effect, which really was effective. So often one tries for shock effects and they don't quite come off. And if they don't, they look very lame and tired. But this one, as far as I've ever seen the picture with an audience, it certainly makes them jump, which is rather fun. The difference between Hammer and Milton, well, Amicus, which was the name of Milton's company, the difference between them was very hard to see. Hammer stuck to its Gothic glory, and very effective they were at it. And Milton didn't try to go down that track at all. And most of his stories and the way and the presentation of them all take place in modern day, except for And Now the Screaming Starts. That was a period picture.
Fen Griffin, which was the name of the novel, was a dull, tedious novel. It had one good idea, and we made a dull, tedious movie.
I liked that picture. I had a good cast, and Stephanie Beacham gives a marvellous performance in it. She really does. She carries the picture, actually. Ian Ogilvy and Herbert Lom again, and Geoffrey Wheatcroft. I still like that picture, apart from its dreadful title.
That was my title. It's meaningless, based on a book that had to do with the droit de seigneur and people getting their arms chopped off.
In case anything would have been better than And Now the Screaming Starts, which is really a cheap, tuppeny-halfpenny way of trying to con the audience into seeing there's something they're not going to see or whatever. So I didn't like that, but there was nothing I could do about it. So yes, happy memories of Amicus for me. Milton and I got to know extremely well. We were very close and we enjoyed each other's company and working together and everything to go with it. Rosenberg I never saw. Well, at least it's not quite true to say I never saw him. He turned up at the end of shooting of Asylum, which was the first one I'd made for Milton. He'd been, as far as I knew, he'd been in New York all the time.
The legend is that I was the outside man and Milton was the inside man. It wasn't true. Milton loved cutting pictures. He spent his time in the cutting room, and I'm afraid that I did all the heavy lifting.
No, I didn't see Rosenberg again until after And Now the Screaming Starts, but I'm not sure I saw him even then. He was certainly not around anyway.
It is not an unfair characterization of the way the company worked. I ran it. I was the managing director of Amicus, but I also ran the studio.
I think another factor in the development or the progress of Amicus as a style, which was Milton, it overstayed its welcome. It just took off when he did the first couple of magazine pictures, which were very successful, and it peaked. And then I think it gradually began to fade away.
If you know T.S. Eliot, you know the line, "That's the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper." I heard John Dark, who was my head of production, talk to either Michael Dealey or Spikings, who were running EMI at the time, our customers, and we supplied them, saying, "What do we need the old man for?" He meant me. I figured it was time for me to leave London. And Milton agonized in the cutting room over every foot of film. That was his contribution up until the time John Dark and Arthur Cleaver decided that maybe Milton was supererogatory. And that was the end of the company.
The relationship or the partnership had cracked up and collapsed in acrimony. Then there was a lawsuit. And as I understood it from Milton, I knew that he was suing. And much later I met him again and I said, "Well, how did it work out? How did you make out?" And he said, "Oh, well, the usual thing. We won the case, the lawyers took the money." And that was the end of that story. And then Milton took ill, didn't he? And it wasn't very long after that he died. If one wanted to write about Max and Milton, you could write a book. They were such a couple of strange characters. And how they ever got together in the first place, I don't know. But they did, I suppose they did quite well for themselves eventually.
I regarded our exercise in two ways. I was determined to make good movies, because my name was attached to it. I also had no emotional investment in this kind of filmmaking, and I did it to make money. We made a great deal of money together. That's it, fellows.